Everyone, and welcome back to our study going through the book of Acts, where we're looking at all this beautiful history of the early church. And today we're kind of we're starting the home stretch, right? We're in the final little section of the book of Acts, and it's looking basically at after Paul's been arrested. He goes through these different phases of his trial, of the way that he's providing defense for himself and with different people. And today we're calling it Paul's trial part 1, the mob, right? Very severe sounding. In essence, this is Paul before of this Jewish mob that has initially asked for his arrest, and they asked for his death, but they'll have to be satisfied with his arrest for now. And this is in Acts 21:37, the very end of chapter 21 through chapter 22, verse 29. And so we're going to dive in and have a lot of fun with this. And as we do this, I kind of want you to be thinking through the idea of giving a defense, of apologetics, this idea of having an answer for the questions that you're asked, and particularly how your testimony relates to those things, right? That it's good for us to have different kinds of responses. So we start, and if you remember from our last study, right, Paul has just been arrested from all these all these Jews who thought that he was bringing Gentiles in the temple. He wasn't, but because he has this Gentile association, it's not a far stretch, right? So in chapter 21, verse 37 on, it says, as he was about to be brought into the barracks, Paul said to the commander, "Am I allowed to say something to you?" He replied, "You know how to speak Greek, right?" This is kind of an odd, little conversation starter. Usually when you're like under arrest and in panic, people don't anticipate you being really polite and formal. They expect like, hey, you're under distress, under whatever. And he's speaking to him in Greek. This is a question and a concern for this commander. It says, aren't you the Egyptian who started a revolt some time ago and led 4,000 men of the assassins into the wilderness? This is a separate guy who led this little revolt. And this, Roman commander was like, oh, this has got to be the same guy. This is why we're arresting him. And Paul says, Paul said, I am a Jewish man from Tarsus of Cilicia, a citizen of an important city. Now I ask you, let me speak to the people. So Paul is letting him know, hey, I'm a Jewish man. I'm not the Egyptian that you're thinking of, but I'm from Tarsus. Tarsus is this big cultural center for Rome in the area. He's like, I'm from this place. Like gives me credence a little bit. And he's like, hey, can I speak to the people? And for some reason, the Roman commander agrees. Maybe it's because he was speaking Greek, maybe because, he's thrown off, maybe because the Holy Spirit is working in the situation, right? But he says, after he had given permission, Paul stood on the steps and motioned with his hands to the people. And when there was a great hush, he addressed them in Aramaic. And this is going to be really important as Paul he's showing how he ministers to different people and interacts with different people in different ways. He speaks Greek to the Roman soldier. He speaks Aramaic, the commonly spoken language of the Hebrews, of the Jews, right, to the Jews. Start again in chapter 22. It says, brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense before you. When they heard that he was addressing them in Aramaic, they became even quieter. He continued, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city, in Jerusalem, educated at the feet of Gamaliel, who, according to the strictness of our ancestral law, Gamaliel is an important Pharisee, a guy of renown, right? I was zealous for God, just as all of you are today. We got to imagine this is Paul kind of buttering up the crowd, where he's like, what can I say that's nice about you? You are zealous. I'll give you that, right? I was zealous for God just as you are today. I persecuted this way to the death, arresting and putting both men and women in jail, as both the high priest and the whole council of elders can testify about me. After I received letters from them to the brothers, I traveled to Damascus to arrest those who were there and bring them to Jerusalem to be punished. So a lot of this is Paul rehashing what he's already said, and a lot of this passage is actually him retelling his testimony, the story that we've heard before in our study. But I want us to really pay attention to what Paul is doing. First, he says, listen now to my defense before you. That word defense is the Greek word apologias, right? That's where we get the word apologetics, this study, this idea, this concept, this realm of having argumentative and logical reasoning for the answers for the questions that give us, right? In the Christian world, apologetics is particularly related to defending our faith, in answering questions like, why do bad things happen to good people? How can a good God believe in hell? Things like that, right? And it's defending faith, or just having like, why do you believe that God exists? Why do you believe that Jesus is God? These are all part of the apologetics realm. And so Paul is really beginning this apologetic defense of himself, of what he's been doing. And he starts with the Jews by relating to their Jewishness. He says, hey, I was born in Tarsus, but I was actually I was raised in Jerusalem, this beautiful Jewish city, and I was just like all of you are. That's kind of the realm that I am, right? Like, I was a Pharisee. I was taught by him in the strictness and zealous of the law, of the ancestral law. I was zealous for God. The thing that you're doing to me, you're zealous for Yahweh. I'm zealous for Yahweh. You persecute me. I was persecuting this way, and I actually did it even more. I persecuted them to death. You want me dead. You can't. But I was actually killing people and arresting them and putting them in jail. And people can testify this about me. And I had written letters of approval to go and continue doing this, in Damascus. And then he tells the Damascus story. But it's important for us to know that he is providing this defense. He has reasoning. Paul's a smart guy. He has answers. He could answer them according to the law, but he's also going to answer them according to his testimony. He's going to say, I'm just like you were. I was where you are, and now I am here, right? That's kind of the path of his testimony in this moment, is like, look at how God has moved me from where I was, where you are, to where I am. He's hoping that this will be a convincing point for these Jews to say, like, oh man, well, Paul started here. Maybe we could go where Paul is. Unfortunately, that is not what happens, but that's Paul's hope in this moment. Verses 6 to 11, I'm going to read them now, but for the sake of our study, right, we can probably summarize these in our notes, because it's a lot of things we've already heard. It says, as I was traveling and approaching Damascus about noon, an intense light from heaven suddenly flashed around me, and I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? I answered, who are you, Lord? He said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, the one you were persecuting. It's interesting, this is different verbiage than we see in Acts chapter 9, where he says, I'm Jesus of Nazareth, but it really really relates Jesus to his Jewishness, right? And just who he is exactly. It says, now those who were with me saw the light, but they did not hear the voice of the one who was speaking to me. I said, what should I do, Lord? The Lord told me, get up and go into Damascus, and there you'll be told everything that you've been assigned to do. Since I couldn't see because of the brightness of the light, I was led by the hand by those who were with me and went into Damascus. And now this is where I'll have y'all pick back up in your studies, in verse 12. But it says, someone named Ananias, a devout man according to the law, who had a good reputation with all the Jews living there. And again, see what Paul is doing here. He's talking about Ananias, the guy that's going to lead him to faith, basically, saying this is a devout man according to the law. This is a guy who follows the Mosaic law, who had a good reputation with the Jews. You all should know him, and you all probably have a relationship with him. Or at least maybe you're aware of him. This gives credence to Paul's Jewishness, right? This is the guy I'm going to. He says, came and stood by me and said, Brother Saul, regain your sight. And in that very hour I looked up and saw him. And he said, the God of our ancestors has appointed you to know his will, to see the righteous one, and to hear the words from his mouth, since you will be a witness for him to all people of what you have seen and heard. I have appointed you to know my will, right? God is saying, this is God telling Paul, I want you to know my will. I want you to know what is good, what is right, and how to move in that direction. I want you to see Jesus, the righteous one. He is the Savior, the Messiah, the one that you Jews have been waiting for. This is the guy, the anointed one, and to hear the words from his mouth. I want you to directly know what he is telling you. He is the Lord. He is the one to listen to, since you will be a witness for him to all people, right? Paul is being tasked with being a missionary and like a witness of Jesus, the resurrected King, the Messiah, to all people, Jews and Gentiles, of what he has seen and heard, the things he studied in the law, but the things he experienced himself. And now, why are you delaying? Get up and be baptized to wash away your sin, calling on his name. And after and so we see Paul telling this moment of, this is my life transformation, right? I was where you were. Look at where I was. Look at how I was persecuting all these Christians. Look at my zealousness as a Pharisee. And now look what happened. This is the second part of the transformation of the testimony process of life transformation. It's a big deal, right? And then it says, after I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw him telling me, hurry and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me. And this is an interesting passage. Paul briefly returns to Jerusalem. It's so insignificant in time frame that it's not even really mentioned. But this is him in Jerusalem, and he receives this vision of Jesus saying, hey, get out. They will not accept you. And Paul, this is an interesting thing for us to read. He says, but I said, Lord, they know that in synagogue after synagogue, I had those who believed in you imprisoned and beaten. And when the blood of your witness Stephen was being shed, I stood there giving a proof and guarding the clothes of those who killed him. And he said to me, go, because I will send you far away to the Gentiles. This is an interesting thing, because it's hard to understand what Paul is saying, because he's just telling Jesus what he did. What he's saying, what it's important for us to get is Paul is saying, hey, I have such a deep care for my Jewish brethren. Romans chapter 9, if you want to head there, it talks about how Paul longs for the Jews to know Jesus as Messiah. And he's like, hey, who better to preach to the Jews about how you are king and you are the Messiah, you are the one that we've waited for, than me, the guy that was doing what they're doing, the guy that persecuted and killed all these people, and that I gave approval of, and that who better to say, look, I've changed, and the things that I was doing, I'm wrong. Paul's saying that, I'm a great witness to this. And Jesus is telling him they will not accept your testimony. And in fact, they are going to try to kill you because of this. Get out of Jerusalem. And even more so, he says, go, because I'm sending you to the Gentiles. Your work, as much as you long for the salvation of the Jews, your brothers and sisters, your people, I'm sending you to the Gentiles, to the nations. I'm sending you to the people that you've grown up not wanting to be around. Paul would never have chosen willingly to go to the Gentiles. He was a Jew. He was the guy that was brought up to know that Jews were God's chosen people. God is the one who transformed Paul's life. God is the one who sent Paul. That is the reality and the beautiful news, right? It is all on God. This is why he's doing this. Paul is the reason he was arrested in the first place for being close to Gentiles. It's because God sent him there. He was a Jew. He, is a Jew, but he was sent to the Gentiles, to the nations, to spread the truth of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. But this is where things take a turn, because they listened to him up to this point, and then they raised their voices, shouting, wipe this man off the face of the earth. He should not be allowed to live. What was the changing point? It's because Paul was told them, I was sent to the Gentiles. They don't want to hear about the Gentiles. They don't want to hear about the nations. This is not what they're about. The Jews are fine with Gentiles becoming Jews, with them celebrating Yahweh, but they are not okay with them and the Gentiles being on the same page, both of them having to do the same thing and accept the same thing in order to follow Jesus. That does not sit well with them. And so they begin to go, hey, get this dude out of here, wipe him out. The same thing that we thought, we still think. It says, as they were yelling and flinging aside their garments and throwing dust into the air, right? They're just causing this big commotion. They're, letting them know how zealous they are. The commander ordered him to be brought into the barracks, directing that he be interrogated with the scourge. And the scourge is awful. It's like a, multi-tiered whip with bones or metal scrapes in it that would rip skin out to the bone. This is what's awaiting Paul, to discover the reason they were shouting against him like this. They were just hey, let's get a confession. This is what this is, right? It's brutal. It's awful. And as they stretched him out for the lash, Paul said to the centurion sitting by, is it legal for you to scourge a man who is a Roman citizen and is uncondemned? Paul is so chill, right? Maybe this is Luke's presentation of Paul, but Paul is so cool undercover, right? This is, again, no panic, just being hey, is this legal? Because I'm a Roman citizen. And Romans were not to be arrested unduly. They were not to be bound unduly. And they absolutely were not to be beaten or scorned or scourged, right? And God forbid if they had been murdered without a trial, that's a punishable offense of death, right? Immediately, The centurion, it says, when the centurion heard this, he went and reported to the commander, saying, "What are you going to do? For this man is a Roman citizen." And the commander came and said, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" "Yes," he said. The commander replied, "I bought this citizenship for a large amount of money." In essence, what would happen is you could either be like born a Roman citizen, or you could basically bribe yourself into getting Roman citizenship, because Roman citizenship meant a lot. Being Roman was a big deal to the Romans. They had better lives. They were, treated better. They could not be slaves. They could not be beaten. Right? They had like the democracy part that you think of applied to Roman citizens. That was a big deal. And he was like, "Hey, I had to buy this." And Paul says, "But I was born a citizen." In essence, what this means is either Paul's father, his grandfather, someone was a significant person in Rome, enough for them to be born a citizen, or for him to be born a citizen, for him to be well thought of in Rome. Paul is a citizen, and that's not something that you can really, like, at that time, it's not something that you would lie about. It's not, because lying about that, punishable by death, right? You don't mess with it. And like, if Paul couldn't prove it, he wouldn't say it, right? So this is a big deal. It says, "So those who were about to examine him withdrew from him immediately. The commander too was alarmed when he realized Paul was a Roman citizen, and he had bound him, right? They shouldn't have even arrested him, let alone bound him, but they did. And they're like, "Ooh, we messed up. This is not good. But we have to do something," right? So Paul ends this chapter not with the Jews, and we presume this whole conversation is now switching back to Greek, that he is now talking about his Roman citizenship. He's talking about who he is, and he is now going to go into Roman custody. He's going to be tried by the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish, leadership. But this is kind of foreshadowing where Paul is going. Paul is an evangelistic opportunist. He sees his arrest, he sees his trial not as a burden and not as a circumstance of dread, but instead an opportunity to share the gospel. He says he starts speaking in Greek because his captors are Roman. He's talking to them. He's letting them know who he is. He's going to get to do that even more later. But then he says, "Hey, actually, can I talk to the people who want me dead? Can I give them my mind?" Right? And they're like, "Why not?" Sure, right? God gives him favor in this moment, and he shares the truth of Jesus Christ, the gospel, to these people. It's unsuccessful, but he is looking for opportunities to share the gospel. Paul is always working. And then he switches back to his Greek. He's looking at them, right? In this passage, we see Paul speak Greek to the Romans. We see him speak Aramaic to the Jews. We see him talk about being born in Tarsus. And then we see him talk about like being raised in Jerusalem. We see him talk about being a Roman citizen. And we also see him talk about how zealous of a persecutor of the faith he was as a Pharisee. Paul is who he needs to be in order to share the faith. He understands the people he's talking to and wants to communicate in their language, both literally and metaphorically. This is a big deal for us when we are thinking about sharing the gospel, is we need to understand the people that we are with. We need to talk their language. We need to speak the way that they speak and do the things they need to do. We never, introduce sin into our lives. However, what we do is minister to them in the way that they need to. The way that I talk and share the gospel with one person is not necessarily the same way I would with another. And we go back to this idea of apologetics, of giving a defense. With some people, our defense may be intellectual. We need to have reasoning. We need to have logical, rational understanding of why we believe what we believe. Some people want us to really dive into the biblical sense of things. Tell me what the Bible says. Some people want our spiritual experience. Some people want our personal testimony, right? This is why Paul shares his testimony. It's not the last time he's going to do so, because ultimately, if we go back to the very first study, Acts 1, right? In Acts 1:8, Jesus tells his disciples, "You will be my witnesses in Judea and Samaria to the ends of the earth," right? A witness shares their testimony, because a testimony can't be refuted. It is personal experience. You can't tell me, "Kel, that's not what happened in your life." That would be a ridiculous thing for you to say. That's our experience, right? And so our apologetics, our defense is everything. It's our testimony, and it's also like that's the biggest portion, but it's also our understandings of why. So, okay, why do you believe that then? You've added this understanding and reason and biblical foundations to everything. It's important for us to pursue these things. And so, in your, if you choose to do the word in action, if you choose to do the activity this week, I'd encourage you to think through your testimonies, right? Do them together and have your students write them out if they have them. Or take this as an opportunity to talk about your testimony, to share your testimony with your students, to say, hey, have you ever had your life changed? But for me, I think about it in the same ways that Paul does, right? Who was I? How did Jesus change me? And then where does Jesus want me, right? This is an easy way to frame your testimony because it's ultimately the gospel. Who was I before Jesus? How did Jesus change me? And who am I because of Jesus / where is he taking me? Jesus lived, he died, he rose from the grave, and he commissioned us, right? That we died. Our old us died. The person we were without Jesus died. He was crucified with him. And he rose up a new person in its stead. And now that new person has a new mission, a new purpose, a commission to go and seek and save the lost. This is what we're called to. And so I encourage you to think in this realm. But guys, I love this passage. I'm excited for where God has us over the next 5 weeks as we look at Paul's trial unfold in different realms. But all I'd say, you guys are awesome. I hope you're doing super well, and I cannot wait to see you guys on Wednesday.